Welcome to Behind the Bearcat. This is the podcast where the Northwest Missouri State University Career Services Office chats with Northwest faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends to hear about their career journeys, how they got to where they are, and how they became Bearcats. I'm Career Services Assistant Director Travis Klein.
And I'm Hannah Christian, the Director of Career Services here at Northwest. And today's guest on our show, the final guest of this part of the season, is...
I'm Amanda Cullin. I'm the Chief of Police at the University Police Department here at Northwest.
Welcome.
Yay! Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you.
We've wanted to have you on the podcast since like season 1, and I've never been able to actually make it happen. So very excited you're joining us for the end of this first part of the fall season. So
fun fact,
I'm excited to be here.
Fun fact, Amanda and I, when we came back to Northwest, Amanda and I started on the same day. So we had our onboarding together, Amanda, myself, and Kathleen Kobayashi. Shout out, Kathleen.
That's a group right there.
She would be a great podcast guest, actually.
I might have to have a censor button, but yeah, we could do that.
So, let us just, because you have a fantastic story to tell, let us just wheel back the wheels of time, wheeling back, and tell us, wee little Amanda, like, what did you want to be when you grew up?
You know, I've thought about this quite a bit because you usually ask your guests what they want to be, when they grow up. And honestly, all I could really come up with was of service. I was a pretty precocious child, right? The first grandchild, both sides, the first female grandchild on one side, and the only. And so I spent a lot of time with adults and my little brother. It was just us two. I spoke. I was very articulate early. And so I spent a lot of time talking to the people around me, family and their friends, community members. So I thought I could be anything, right? And so, that changed my mind regularly, from my mom was a nurse. And so, she worked at a nursing home as well as a doctor's office. And I thought that was fantastic. So I wanted to be a nurse and a doctor and the lady that answered the phone, right? My dad was a state trooper. And so, I got to meet a lot of cool people through him, whether we were going out to the sheriff's house in the middle of nowhere and eating possum and noodles, or whether we were just gigging for frogs in a local pond. So, I wanted to be all of those things. I wanted to be a hunter, and I wanted to be a police officer and a deputy and a dispatcher. I got to talk to the jailers. And so I can't really narrow it down to one thing other than, we spent a lot of time in the library. We spent a lot of time just walking around town and talking to the local business people, because it was a small town, a town of 1,000. And so we got to know everybody. My grandfather was the assessor. So I thought, hey, working at the courthouse seemed pretty cool too. So honestly, we walked to church after school every day. So just kind of wanting to be of service, where am I needed and what can I do and get me involved.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And now you have a job where you get to do a lot of those things. Maybe not all of them, but you had several of those, I would say, of service. Absolutely. So
absolutely.
So tell us how you got to Northwest, like initially.
So my dad was transferred to Nottoway County. He was a state trooper, like I mentioned before, in 1990, which would have been the summer before my 8th grade year. We lived about 4 blocks away from campus. So I finished out my high school career as a spoof hound. We lived right across the street from Lester and Leona Swaney, right there on Fossiana Drive. And so I grew up talking to her as well as him. He was one of the famed managers and trainers of Fostiana Farms here in town. And he was a tattletale, I'm going to be honest. He told on me all the time. I did like to drive fast, and So after I graduated high school, the next best step was Northwest, honestly. I'd been in town, my family had lived in town for about 5 years. And during that time, my dad was promoted again and had moved out of the county over to Harrison County by Bethany, Missouri. And so I was kind of like on my own. But I had the background and the community connections here in Maryville, so it was a perfect fit. I came in the summer before because a lot of my friends were faculty members, um, kids. So we got the benefit of running around campus the summer before. Um, and even being a townie, you would cross over onto campus more in the summer, right? You go play basketball or tennis and ride your bikes through campus and just hang out in general. And then when the students came back on, you kind of went back to your territory there. But that summer was great. Um, we had a great teacher. We took geography. We had a really fun time because there was nobody. It was basically like campus was to ourselves. Not soon after that, I was looking for a campus job. And my best friend, who was Andrea Lucido, worked in Dr. Bob Bush's office. And so I took that opportunity to have her put in a good word so I could work at campus safety at the time. I was familiar with, dispatching, and that's what I wanted to do as, a student part time as I, finished classes and worked on those. And I got that opportunity with the director at the time was Sharon Meadows. And then soon after, we hired Sergeant Clarence Green. And so, getting in, knowing kind of that culture a little bit because I'd grown up in it, as well as having the benefit of, tuition assistance and knowing people in and around the campus community was a huge benefit. And it was home, but it was newer to me because like I said, I just moved 4 years, 5 years previous. And so it was still a little exciting. I was still learning people and places and things. So that's how
So
I got it.
how'd you choose your major?
My major is advertising. I started off as a journalism major. Um, I got the benefit of working with those journalism professors. I mean, Laura Widmer was, my freshman seminar person. So, that was a huge benefit. I loved writing and I loved reading. Journalism made sense because I liked interaction with the community. I also once I got into campus safety, I really got interested, and this kind of explains my childhood right here. I got real interested in psychology and sociology. So then I switched my major to psych and soc. Um, writing's always beneficial no matter what you're doing. Knowing how to write, knowing those rules. So those classes were definitely helpful. Loved psych and soc. Took a semester or two off as I went to the police academy when I turned 20. And
Did you already know that you wanted to do that? Like at that point, were you like, yes, I'm gonna go to police academy, or you just like woke up one day and you were like, oh, like what contributed to that decision?
I think a lot of that is what was modeled around me. I really enjoyed the work that was being done. We were not quite where we are now, right? Times were different, but the vision was there, and I wholeheartedly believed in that vision. And being of service to your campus community as well as to your community, I was interested in possibly going federal to the FBI. My dad knew the FBI agent stationed in St. Joe quite well. So we'd went on a couple lunches together and such and talked about, what that path looked like going forward. And they required 3 years of previous experience with law enforcement. as well as a degree, preferably in accounting or a foreign language, which was neither of those were my strengths. But so, we talked about what that looked like. Clarence was excited. Um, he was involved, and, we were kind of going towards that avenue. Um, so I went to the police academy, came back at 21, and that at that time we were not armed. When I came back, we had worked through that process with Dr. Hubbard, and we became armed soon after that. And so, there was a lot of new and exciting things happening, which kind of pushed off my graduation date a little bit. Um, and so, thinking about all those things that I wanted to do and my professional goals, and then I fell in love with a football player. So that kind of changed the trajectory of my professional life right then. We got married, we had kids, further, slowed down my graduation date. And so it got to the point where I looked at, hey, I have these journalism classes, right? And I have these psych and soc classes. Now what does that mean? And when you smash them together at that time, which would have been the early 2000s, that was an advertising
You get
degree.
advertising.
Yeah, you did. And so, I mean, all of the things I learned were so valuable in what I was doing in my job day to day, as well as, raising children. It just all those things that I learned were great things. My kids love books, they love to read, um, as well as those psych and social classes, had a lot of good tips in it. So, got that advertising degree and continued to work, continued to meet great people, and we continued to do great things. I got to a point where I needed to kind of step back a little bit and focus more on the family. So that's what I did. I stayed home. I worked as a postmaster replacement. We lived in the beautiful small village of Clyde, Missouri. So we had some acreage out there. So we had plenty of free time to do all the reading and the arts and the crafts and, exploring nature. Great community. And when my youngest went to school, I took the necessary certification requirements to teach. And so I went to school with them. And for about 10 years, we lived in that community. And I worked at Jefferson there. Great school, great people. Couldn't have asked for better upbringing for my children. And then I got a call from Clarence Green saying, hey, we'd love to have you back at Northwest. And I know you both have spoken to Clarence, and it's really hard to tell that man no. And it actually worked out. My children were older, in high school, and I missed it. I missed a lot of what we do is education based, and just having those connections with that older age group was missed. And so I skipped on back, happy to be back. And
I got a question. Hold on, I got a question. A burning question.
Okay.
So you have an advertising degree and you're like, I'm going to go get some certifications to teach. It's not like at Jefferson there's going to be an advertising role open. So how did you decide what you were going to teach and get certified in? Like, what kind of talk me through that little decision process there?
So, once again, that advertising degree comes in handy because those journalism pieces and that organization, as well as the psych and soc working with children. I was certified in birth through 8th grade. I was certified in ELA up through 10th grade. So I taught reading in ELA as well as some social studies. The great thing about being in a small school is you get a lot of opportunities, kind of like working at Northwest. And so it's a little of duties as assigned, right? Where are you needed? Where can I be of assistance? So it was a lot of reading, working with students who were struggling with reading, as well as working with students who excelled at reading, and just having that variety every day and making those connections with, those children who are learning and eager to learn, and finding out what motivates them wanting to read, where's their passion, what do they want to learn about. So all of those pieces strangely fits into advertising, right? Because I'm selling these books
Mhm.
to these children, and trying to get them involved and get them passionate about learning and reading, and engaging their peers, and having these conversations. My favorite thing was when they proved me wrong, because the pride, and just the ability to have that discussion with an adult and come out on top. It a great way to build confidence. A great way to build confidence, and across all age levels. But at that age of late elementary, early middle school, it was just you can see it on their faces, and it's a very satisfying job. A job that I miss. I see a lot of those students now at Northwest, so that's very satisfying as well.
You mentioned teaching being a big part of what you do at Northwest with UPD. So people that aren't familiar with kind of our model of community policing and kind of how you guys serve campus may seem odd. So kind of explain what you guys really do with UPD, because you are the police force on campus, but that's really, you're more than that by a whole lot, I would say too, right?
I mean, any opportunity we have to touch base, we call them touch points here at UPD, with our students and employees, benefits us. A lot of times it's not as much as crimes, it's the ability not to problem solve with the processes that are set in place. So a lot of it is just, how do I navigate adulthood? How do I navigate these processes I've never maybe been exposed to before? Or if this was something that I've dealt with in the past, it could have been handled differently, more punitively, opposed to, hey, this is how this cannot happen again, or this is what you can do to help yourself and others. And so, creating that opportunity. And again, this has been modeled for me since I've been at Northwest, but creating that opportunity of, I know we say it 100 times every year, but every student, every day, if we can, teach and educate on how to work these processes. And when we make a mistake, these are the consequences and these are our options moving forward. That benefits us all, because that is less crime. That is, you know, learning how to navigate these systems, whether it's the legal system, whether it's institutions of higher ed, whether it's mental health resources. How do we navigate that so we can help ourselves and help others? So, you know, that is what our focus is always, is not just to correct, but to almost redirect, I think would be a better word. This is how this
Educate.
can happen. Educate.
Educate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't always work. And that doesn't mean that, we don't try, but everybody is unique and different. And so we have to find out what works best for them. And that may be not being here, or that may be, C's and D's get degrees. But figuring out what works best and how we can be of assistance of someone else's success, that's a service right there.
So you heard the siren call of Clarence Green. And what role did you step back when you came back in 2015? Um, June the 8th or 9th, I don't remember exactly that specific day, but what role were you stepping back into?
So, a little background. Back when we were campus safety, we didn't have any full-time dispatchers. We just had student dispatchers. And I had the opportunity to be the first full-time dispatcher here at campus safety. and we had one at the time. Um, so having this conversation about, hey, I'd love to have you back, and my response was, hey, I love a full night's sleep, right? And my children are highly involved. I stepped back into it was an office manager grant person role. So I was over the communications part, the dispatch. Um, that gave me the opportunity to relearn the culture because it had changed, as well as meet and engage the people, um, as well as, look at what Northwest had grown into. Because when I left, it was Dr. Hubbard, and I came back and it was Dr. Jasinski, and things had changed. And so, and Clarence had grown the department, changed the department. It was a great opportunity. So I stepped back in that role. I was in that role for around 6 months, and then a lieutenant's position came open, and I applied.
And you just sanded a little bit of rust off and jumped back into the gear and ran with it.
Yeah, if it was that easy. Took a couple tests.
Tell me about sort of you're a female chief of police. Tell me kind of what it means to you to be a woman in what I'm assuming is traditionally sort of a man's role, right? Policing is kind of traditionally seen as a man's role, though I would argue we've seen a lot of feminine and female police officers here. So just can you speak to that? Like what does it mean to you and what kind of leadership are you able to provide in that situation?
Research shows that women tend to be better at de-escalating a situation opposed to using force. Now, the research is valid. However, that doesn't necessarily mean we're better police officers. We just handle things a little differently. Usually when you're smaller in stature, you tend to speak a little more before you act because it is a bigger physical movement to take someone who's 2 or 3 times larger than you down. And, police work is teamwork. You never, ever, very rarely do anything alone. You have that camaraderie, um, great people that I work with within the department, as well as, outside of the department that will respond very quickly. So, having the ability to mentor other females in law enforcement is honestly the best part of this job. Just seeing the empowerment, the confidence build. And don't get me wrong, you see this in all new law enforcement officers. But when I went through the academy, it was a little different than it is today, which is a very good thing. We sat through a lecture of one of our professors telling us that giving us the reasons why law enforcement was better before women were allowed to apply. And so looking at it from that point of view, that sets the tone, right? Not just for the class, but it can set the tone for when you return back to your department. You just never kind of get those lectures out of your head. You think about that when you're working in this type of field. It's very ambiguous. We have policies and procedures to protect ourselves and to protect others. But it kind of reminds me of the Buddhist parable about the farmer and, if something is lucky or not. Like his horse runs away, is that unlucky? Maybe. Right? Horse brings back a herd, is that, wow, that's really lucky? Maybe, right? Son breaks his leg falling off one of the wild horses. How unlucky? Maybe.
He didn't
the
have
son
to go to war. Yeah.
Yeah, the son doesn't get drafted. Yeah. And so a lot of what we do, you make a decision based on the knowledge you have, the experience you have, the people around you. what's best in that moment. And whether or not it's the best decision is always a maybe. It's going to depend on who you're dealing with and what happens in that next second, right? And who you're working with. And so thinking about that, and thinking about how women work and how men work and how humans work, right? And the population, the community that we're working with right now, how they look, how they are, how they work, how they learn. It's always kind of amazing. But I love the opportunity to meet with women who've had more experience with me than me, or having more experience in larger departments, and talking with them. And then, meeting with other institutes of higher education, police departments, and what it looks like for them. And then meeting with, some of the sheriff's departments and what it looks like for women in their departments. And although every department is different and every community is different, it's it's knowing that we're dealing with the same things when it comes to being a woman in law enforcement, and how we can assist the new hires, the new officers, the new dispatchers on growing and learning, and hopefully sidestepping some of the issues that we dealt with on a daily. And so there's the world is changing, and so we're automatically walking in a room. I was under the age of 25 and an investigator training with all white men, 45 and up. And so it's hard because you build those relationships by what you do after class. And those weren't always welcoming spaces for me. But that has changed dramatically, and there are lots of welcoming spaces that I can have those conversations with, that I can learn with, and grow with. And I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything. I learned so much. I mean, we almost learn more from our uncomfortable or negative experiences than we do from our positive ones. And I had those opportunities, and they were great. But it wasn't always easy,
Mhm.
and sometimes it was hard to find someone to about talk to about these things that fully understood without being negative. And so yeah, I mean, it's a great environment. More and more women are applying every day. um, Having a diverse work team is so important. So having, men and women and non-binary and all of that included, just makes our department stronger and able to assist and serve our community even better. So I always look forward to, bringing in new people, but I'll be honest, it's not the same, and that's a good thing. That is a very good thing.
So one of the things I think is unique I think we had Matt Baker on a few seasons ago, and he talked about, really kind of thinking about campus as a small city. Like it operates like a small city. It's kind of the size of a small city. So it's a small city within a small city. So thinking about that, like as the police force for this small city, you have to also coordinate with the city of Maryville and with Nottoway County. And I think that is another thing that's kind of unique to Northwest versus a lot of other maybe more urban setting schools where, they may have, a larger police force right there. But I mean, really, it's, you are kind of one of three kind of lines of defense. So can you talk about maybe that collaboration between the city of Maryville, Nottoway County, and Northwest as its own little like encapsulated
Law
municipality, I
enforcement
guess? Yeah.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Northwest UPD, we collaborate with Maryville Police Department and the Nottoway County Sheriff's Department, daily,
Mhm.
daily. We back each other up, um, as far as operations and patrol goes. If there's something happening, we're all available to assist. And that is a huge benefit because we all are smaller agencies, but knowing that you can tap into that, and that creates a stronger presence, as well as well-trained people is a huge benefit. We all have our strengths, and the ability to build off of each other's strengths is a positive, is an absolute positive. We deal with large events here on campus, as well as, the ability to put together. We'll have sometimes 4, 5, 6,000 people on campus for a football game. We bring in speakers as well as, events that bring in people from outside of our area. So we have a lot of experience in that, opposed to we don't run that much traffic, right? When you have a small jurisdiction, there's just not the ability to run as much traffic as if you're working in the county. And so if we have a question or need assistance, if we have a pursuit or something of that sort, they're the experts, right? Because that's something that they deal with on a regular basis. So being able to tap into that is huge. Administratively, it's just a great group. We all work together very well. If someone asks for something, the other two departments go above and beyond to make it happen, because we know in the very next breath we could need something as well. And so Mike Stolte at the city, and Randy Strong, and soon Austin Han, just a great bunch of people. I saw most of them today in meetings and trying to see how we can provide what's best for our community, because our students live within the community in the county. Their community members take classes or teach or live on campus even. So we work together, it's great. I couldn't imagine a better partnership. Honestly, I just stepped into it. Those partnerships were created before I was here, but it's great. I mean, I can't. When I talk to other departments and other trainings that I've been to, and they talk about some struggles they have with working with other agencies, we don't have that here. We may disagree, but we will respectfully challenge each other and figure out what's best based on what our resources are and what our strengths are, and move forward in a positive direction. So yeah, I can't say enough about working with the outside agencies. And that includes the juvenile office, that includes North Star Advocacy Center, that includes Mosaic. These are the people, the ambulance district, these are the people that we're working with in times of crisis. And there's not a lot of time during those events where you can hug it out or, talk about, hey, this is the way I think we should do it. That's very action based, but being able to get together with them after action, being able to look and see where we could improve, and knowing that every incident is unique and very ambiguous, and we could do it the same next time and it not work out exactly
Be
right.
totally different. Yep.
Yeah, we all just kind of adapt and overcome, and it's a great thing. Yeah, it's beautiful to see. I love watching it. So
So you mentioned the FBI, maybe wanting to go to the FBI, and you actually went to an FBI academy earlier this year, right?
yeah,
Tell
absolutely
us
went
a little
to.
bit about that.
Yeah, so the FBI National Academy is a leadership academy. Um, I had the opportunity to go, even following Anthony Williams. He went 3 classes in front of me, 4 classes in front of me, 10 classes in front of me. I don't know, some classes in front of me. And yeah, it was a great experience. It was a residential training. It was 2.5 months. Um, you had to fill out a little piece of paper about if you would be interested in having an international roommate. We actually stayed in dormitory style rooms, twin size beds. We had a Jack and Jill bathroom shared with another room of 2 women. I had the opportunity of rooming with someone from Iceland. We were similar in age. We had kids similar of age. She actually worked for the National Prosecution Office. And so it was very interesting. learning about how they do things and why they do things. Funny story is when she moved in, she said, "My husband told me I had to tell you that I am an active sleep talker." And I'm like, "Oh, thank goodness, me too." So I'm like, at least we can. But I knew when she was talking in her sleep because I couldn't understand a word. And so it all worked out. I told her it'd be fun. But yeah, we spent our day taking graduate level classes, which was a great opportunity because they had things like the behavioral analysis, which again, kind of tapped into that psych and soc degree. And they would bring them in because they're all broken up depending on what they're working on. And they would bring them in and do case studies with us. And part of my area that here in the Kansas City, we're Kansas and Western Missouri. I got to meet a homicide detective, Justin, out of KCMO. And so, it was very interesting sitting next to him in that class because his experiences were different than my experiences. And when we were going back and forth, like, no, it's this guy, or no, it's this gal, it was just interesting to see how things were processed. But they would sit up there, present the case, we'd get to see the crime scene photos and autopsy and results and all of that. And then we had to work the case backwards, saying, how did this happen? So that was exciting because a lot of people know the FBI and working at the FBI Academy based on the television shows. So being able to work with those analysis were great. And then at the end, you get to shake hands and they give you a card and ask you if you want to go out to lunch. And so, just great experiences. There was a physical fitness component of it, which was a great opportunity. Very rarely, especially, at the level or age that I am at, do you get to really just focus on yourself. And so in the morning you get up and you know what you need to do. And then at night when you go to bed, the next morning it's all about you too. And so, that was a great opportunity. We took trips to New York and got to see NYPD and kind of how they work and their situation room and such. We went to Philly, um, we went to DC, and they brought in great speakers. We just got to experience a lot of great things. Also, the learning part, it comes down to everybody. Again, I've said this, but everybody is dealing with different things, based on if I'm talking to, a captain out of Boston or, one of the lieutenants out of Miami, Florida, right? Definitely we're dealing with different things. But when it comes down to things like personnel, leadership, motivating others, crime, how do we reduce crime and what does that prevention effort look like and what's community policing look like? And one of my favorite classes was our social media class, right? Our communication class. And they would stick you up in front of that mic and tell you about some horrible incident that just happened and then let's talk about it, right? So that hit on my journalism side as well as on that advertising side. And how do you promote your department, especially when things aren't going well. And so, yeah, just a great experience. Would love for all of my people to go. I think that's just one of those things that even if you're not law enforcement based, it's just interesting. You have access to the FBI library, certain things that you would not normally have access to. So, yeah, great experience.
Um, so back to the physical fitness. Tell us, like, as a woman of a certain age, like, what do you have to do to stay in shape? Like, what is your like? I need the Chief Cullin. No, this is it. We can. This social media. We need the Chief Cullin plan, like physical fitness plan, and we can TikTok this, and we can have a little dance as well. It would be a rager. So tell us, what's your keys to staying in shape?
Surprisingly, it was a lot of stretching and it was a lot of how do you stay healthy, right? So you can stay upright. They did challenge us. We got to go to the Marine football stadium and work out with wounded warriors who
Oh, wow.
absolutely kicked our butts. But it was a great experience. Ran stairs. Um, we did at the end. It's called the Yellow Brick Road, and it's a 6 mile trek through. A little bit of it is going to be the marine obstacle course, and then about 4 miles of it's going to be running. Um, but they started off every workout session, and I took the first thing in the morning one because, of course, right, get it done. And we would spend so much time stretching, talking about, hey, squats are not for you anymore, but this is what you need to do. And then, it was a lot of high intensity, honestly, a lot of things that are done on campus, a lot of band work, a lot of medicine ball work, a lot of riding the bikes and, lifting the weights. And although the weight at times was heavy, there was no, we're not maxing out or any of those things. We're not running marathons by any means. Now, there were some Marines at Quantico that were definitely doing some of those things, but they talked a lot about how to stay healthy so you can be physical, for your entire life. We talked a lot about diet. Um, the food was fantastic, cafeteria food, but it was fantastic. And we would talk about what you needed when, whether you were male or female based on your body weight. So we did end up getting to go hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And so, I've always seen people training on campus with the big backpacks, right? And I'm like, you're walking. Oof, there's a difference. And so, definitely felt that the next day, next 3 days. But, just staying healthy, just making sure everything can work as long as it possibly can. 3 classes before us, a guy from Kansas City had a heart attack and they brought him back to life and he refused to go home. So he finished out. But
Wow.
so we did have the nurses in the 4x4 following us around everywhere,
Mhm.
which was helpful if you needed a band-aid. But they had ice for us at all times. But yeah, it was a lot of stamina, a lot of this is the best way to do this at your age. And
Mm.
it was greatly appreciated. Now, if only they could, send stuff
Come
to us
here and
through that.
follow you in a four
Right.
by four.
Yes, that would be awesome.
Fantastic. Well, we want to be respectful of your time, but I don't want to let you go before we ask you maybe some advice. So we love to ask guests, like advice for students, maybe advice for maybe people who are considering a career in law enforcement or in service. What advice would you give those students as they start their journey from someone who's been very successful on theirs?
I think some of the best advice I've been ever given when it comes to not necessarily law enforcement, but it definitely applies, is that you never outperform your 5 people you spend the most time with.
Hmm.
And so I think being intentional on who you spend your time with, learning from them. I have the benefit of working on campus, so there's a huge resource of great people to talk about those big ideas and those goals and how to be a success and what's it look like for you and what's coming up next, right? So I think just intentionally picking out those people to spend time with, to have conversations with, to touch base with. This doesn't have to be an everyday thing, but who are your mentors? And then who can you mentee? And the thing about this generation of students is they are wicked smart and they're able to resource very effectively and efficiently, honestly. Um, and of course, they're young, and young humans do young human things. But, knowing that I learned so much from our students, and I learned so much from people who don't know how to work the internet well, right? And so they're just diversify, diversify who you speak with, and
Mm,
make sure you're spending your time with people who have similar goals as you do. Law enforcement is changing, it's not getting easier, and we really need good people who are willing to serve. Um, it's one of those jobs like in medical care and certain jobs within the medical field that it's going to test your ability to think due to shift work. Lack of sleep can really impact your ability to make a decision. And so I think one of the most important things is learn what you need to take care of yourself, because when it comes time to being able to test that, you need to know, hey, who are my resources? What do I need to do? Whether that's getting out in nature, taking a nap, maybe traveling. What do you need to do? What do I need to do so that I can maintain my health in order to help others? And so, if you're interested in law enforcement, everybody's looking. Everybody is looking. You can get in at any level right now. Um, you need to be very aware, again, of who you spend your time with and what you're doing with that time. But to be successful in law enforcement, you can have an advertising degree. One of our sergeants has an art degree, and he's awesome. He's able to have conversations with people and connect with people that, others cannot. So we have all sorts of majors are welcome. Anything that is your strength can be used in law enforcement. I know it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But, if people are interested in it, challenge yourself and give it a try, because it's definitely very rewarding and self-satisfying, and you sleep well at night, because you've done hard and good work. So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We
awesome.
appreciate you
Thank
for
you
being
for
a
being a
guest.
thank
guest.
you guys. Yeah, I hope I gave you at least 2 sound bites.
Oh, no, lots of sound bites. We appreciate it. So, all right. Well, that will do it for another episode of Behind the Bearcat, and we will talk to you next time. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to give us a thumbs up below. That helps out. Also, if you've not done so yet, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Also, we'd love to connect with you on social media. You can find Behind the Bearcat on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Plus, the audio podcast comes out on Fridays on all the major podcast platforms. Thanks again for watching Behind the Bearcat, and as always, we'll talk to you next time.